In the most recent Studio One update, Presonus added multi-channel support with channel configurations up to 9.1.6. And many of you have pointed out that 9.1.6 means that I have 16 channels available. So even though Studio One doesn't really allow Ambisonics tracks, shouldn't that mean that I can use third-order Ambisonics in Studio One? Well, let's find out. Before I get started, I should talk a little bit about what Ambisonics is and why we want to use it. Now, I'm not going to go into the details. I did a number of videos about Ambisonics in the past, and I'm going to leave a couple of links in the description below in case you're interested. But in a nutshell, Ambisonics is a way to capture spatial audio, and you do that by describing the spatial sound field around the listener position in a mathematically accurate way. Now, the easiest way to think about that is in terms of virtual microphones. The image here shows you the pickup patterns of the virtual microphones of an ambisonic signal of order 3. Each of those microphones represents one channel in the ambisonic signal. And the interesting thing about ambisonics is that you can increase the quality of the signal by adding microphones. So if you add additional rows to the rows of microphones here, I can get from third order ambisonics to higher orders of ambisonics. So you get from third to fourth to fifth to sixth and so forth. Currently, Reaper and Pro Tools can work with ambisonics up to order 7. And Nuendo and Cubase are set up to work with Ambisonics up to order 3, which essentially requires 16 channels. So why are we doing it that way? That seems awfully complicated, and the simple reason is that there are a couple of really useful applications of Ambisonics. Ambisonics is currently mainly used in virtual reality and augmented reality applications. YouTube VR, for example, uses Ambisonics. Facebook 360 uses Ambisonics. You can also use it for spatial audio design for game development. That's also a very popular application area of Ambisonics. Many people use it for live performances simply because Ambisonics can do things that no other spatial audio format can do. One thing, for example, is that in Dolby Atmos, for example, you don't really have the possibility to represent any audio that comes from below. Ambisonics, on the other hand, can do that. So there are applications in the performances or live performances area. And then finally, it is also used for recording. So if you want to record an orchestra, for example, and you want to do that in a spatial way, you usually kind of do that with spatial audio through Ambisonics. And with that being said, can we work with Ambisonics in Studio One? Now, Studio One does not have an integrated Ambisonics workflow, like, for example, Cubase, Nuendo, or Pro Tools. However, it does have 9.1.6 tracks now, and 9.1.6 means there are 16 channels, and 16 channels is what we need for third-order Ambisonics, so technically this should be possible, right? And it actually is. However, there are a couple of complications, so you need to be a little bit particular about the types of plugins that you're going to use. I'm going to show you one way on how to do that, and we are going to use the Audio Brewers plugins for that purpose. Now, if you've been a regular viewer of my channel, you know that I'm a big fan of Audio Brewers. They provide a number of very innovative and creative Ambisonics plugins. And as it turns out, Alejandro, who is the developer and owner of Audio Brewers, spent a lot of time making sure that his plugins are compatible with Studio One. Because as it turns out, it's not just the fact that Studio One can work with 16 channel tracks. There are a couple of complications that come from the fact that the channel orders are a little bit weird. And plugin developers need to make sure that their plugins actually work with the correct channel order. Now, this is actually a re-edit and re-upload of a video that I did a couple of days earlier, and in the initial version of this video I mentioned a second option that you could use. However, as it turns out, that second option had a couple of issues with respect to the channel orders that is used in Studio One. In particular, there were certain channels that these plugins did not even recognize at all. So I decided to re-edit and re-upload, and this is where we are. We are left with one option. This is Audio Brewers, which quite frankly is a very good option. So let's dig into how to use Audio Brewers plugins with Ambisonics or for Ambisonics in Studio One. So let's hop into Studio One, and as always I'm going to use a relatively simple project because all I really want to do is I want to demonstrate how the Ambisonics workflow works in Studio One. And for that purpose I have two tracks here. The first one holds an instance of Tune with one of those one finger presets, and the second track holds an instance of Audio Modern's Playbeat, just to give it a little bit of a beat. So let's have a listen. So as you can hear, very, very simple loop, but it's perfectly fine for what we want to do here. So let's turn that into an Ambisonics project. Now, the only thing we need to do for that really is we need to add a 16-channel track. And in Studio One, that means we need to add a 9.1.6 track. The way we're going to do that here is by adding a 9.1.6 bus, and we're going to route the two instruments that we have into that bus and then convert the signal on that bus into Ambisonics for additional processing through an Ambisonics effect, for example. So let's add a bus. So we're going to add a bus channel, and that bus, as we said, is going to be a 9.1.6 bus. Let's also give that a name so that we know what we're talking about. So that's going to be Ambisonics. And then we're going to route the two instruments that we have, instead of into the main output, into this Ambisonics bus. Now at the moment, all I'm really doing is I have an additional bus channel and I'm routing the two instruments into 9.1.6 and then converting it back into stereo. But what I really want to do is I want to use that 9.1.6 track in order to process Ambisonics. Now, to do that, what we need to do is we need to add an encoder, and Audio Brewers provides an encoder that actually works on those 9.1.6 buses that Studio One provides. So let's add that. So in the inserts, we're going to add the AB encoder. Now, as I said in some of my previous videos about Studio One, when you're working with multi-channel, be aware that you need to choose the VST3 versions of those plugins, because otherwise it's not going to work. Studio One only works with VST3 multi-channel plugins. So let's search for the AB encoder in VST3. Here we have it. That essentially will make sure that the signal is converted into third-order Ambisonics. Now, at the moment, it is set to receive a stereo signal, but we are actually on a 9.1.6 track, so we're going to switch that over to Atmos 9.1.6, and that will then make sure that the 9.1.6 signal is coming in, and that is going to be converted into third-order Ambisonics. Now, at that point, you would already be fine if you would produce Ambisonics, for example, and you would sort of export that into Ambisonics. You can do that. However, because we also want to hear something, we need to add an decoder at the end. And the way to do that in Studio One, or the easiest way to do that in Studio One, is simply by swapping out the panning device on that bus. So instead of using the standard panner that Studio One provides, what we can do is we can actually switch that out. So if we click on that little triangle here, we have the kind of options that we have in terms of panners, and we're going to go to the other section, and in the other section we're going to choose the AB decoder, higher order Ambisonics, and that decoder will then essentially convert that back into stereo. I can also switch that over to binaural, for example, or to other kind of options that I have. So if you're working in a 7.1.4 studio, for example, you could use that decoder in order to decode to 7.1.4, but here we are kind of just working in stereo. So let's play our audio again, and at that point I should already receive an audio signal here in the decoder. Once again, the audio is going through the individual tracks. It is going to be routed into the Ambisonics track, into this 9.1.6 that's going to be serve as an Ambisonics track. It's going to be encoded with the AB encoder and then decoded again with the decoder. So let's play the audio. And as you can see, the signal is coming in here. Now what I can do now is I can pan the signals around. So if I'm panning that to the left, for example, and maybe also up, I will actually see that in the decoder, and everything is decoding correctly. Now, as I said before, Audio Brewers spend a lot of time making sure that the channel order is correct, because plugins on 9.1.6 tracks in Studio One can be a little bit tricky to implement. The one thing that I did over the last couple of days is I really checked if everything is working okay, and as it turns out, they did an excellent job and all the channels are routed correctly, so you can safely work with Ambisonics with the Audio Brewers encoder-decoder pair. The one thing that's also nice here, you can actually also drop Ambisonics, native Ambisonics track or native Ambisonics audio into your project, and you can also route them, and everything just works perfectly fine with the Audio Brewers plugins. Now, let's be a little bit more creative. So what we can do, for example, is now that we have that in Ambisonics, what we can do, for example, is we can add an Ambisonics effect from Audio Brewers. So let's, here we have Audio Brewers. Let me, what can we do? Let's let's do the delay. Let's do the delay once again. Make sure that we are going to use the VST3 version of that delay. And let's play our audio. So we can now kind of use that spatial audio delay. Let me maybe kind of move that back. And we can change the delay settings here. So let's reduce the dry signal maybe so that we get a better understanding of what's happening here. So let's change the feedback. Let's maybe only kind of use the delay for the mono signal. Let's do something like that. That was maybe a little much. And that works just fine. And we have the penna here. And that works fine. Now, if I want to export that as an Ambisonics file, I would just have to switch out the decoder to the standard penna again and then simply export everything and it would work just fine. Be aware that if you're routing audio between Ambisonics tracks, so for example, you're using multiple tracks or multiple buses that are all 9.1.6 that are supposed to hold Ambisonics audio, you cannot disable the penna, and that essentially means you need to make sure that you're not kind of screwing around with the penna from in case you're routing from one track to another track, because that would screw up the Ambisonics signal. In Nuendo and Cubase, for example, you can actually disable the penna. You can't do that in Studio One, so you need to be careful not to change the penna settings in case you're routing from one Ambisonics track into another Ambisonics track, and that works just perfectly fine. Now, this is really everything I wanted to say today. As you've seen, this is really simple and it works incredibly well. Just be sure that you're sticking to the Audio Brewers plugin, because it turns out all the other Ambisonics plugins, even if they seem to work, have some issues with the channel layouts. However, Audio Brewers made an effort to make sure that they actually work in Studio One, and they bring full Ambisonics capabilities to the current version of Studio One, which is really cool and great. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join our Discord community. Email link is in the description below. And with that being said, see you at the next video.